is a very prestigious and serious establishment. Too bad it acts as mature as a horny 16-year-old girl going through her Wattpad phase for the first time. What if Velma from Scooby-Doo was Indian? What if Luke from Star Wars had boobies? To call the film industry a fanfiction factory would actually be quite offensive to fanfiction and its writers, since the very name of fanfiction alludes to the fact that it's written by a fan for the pleasure of other fans out of sheer passion and love for the source material. And, I mean, I wouldn't exactly use the word passion regarding any of this. But most importantly, what fanfiction is notorious for is the lack of, originality, and that is what Hollywood out of all things decided to be inspired by. It feels like the film industry at some point during 2010s realized that if they just spawn a bunch of alternative universes for their already existing anything that could contain any semblance of plot, they don't have to brain anymore and still bank billions. And as bad as it sounds, it's not really the worst approach. Again, fanfiction, even despite its many problems, at heart is a wish fulfillment mechanism for its fandom. There's nothing wrong with these alternative universe projects, even despite their lack of originality, since they seem to serve the fandom on paper. No Way Home is a great example that the general public could very well and successfully be satisfied by unoriginal concepts if filmmakers put enough effort and passion into it. I don't think it would be a reach to say that No Way Home is better at and more interested in being a good fanfic than it is in being a masterful filmmaking. And I also think that looking back, this is why I had such a viscerally negative reaction to the film at the time. Even though it proves that this type of media could be well done, it seemed to me like its success rewarded Hollywood and further motivated it to keep pumping out these soulless alternative universes and versions of different media. And this is a problem, since the issue at hand is that, well, most of these projects are not written by a fan. They're not written with a sheer passion or even knowledge of the source material. The beauty of fanfiction is that it's a non-profit. There's no way to get commercial or greedy with it. It is driven by a sheer devotion and affection, and that is why something as commercialized and materialistic as Hollywood could never ever pull off being a fanfic machine. More I think about it, the more it seems to me like this phase of Hollywood was a handy tool that allowed the industry to get even greedier and lazier, but at the end of the day, it was not the root of the problem. This phase of the film industry didn't have to go down as one of the worst. It could have been just a phase of film nostalgia and comebacks in fashion. Of course, some would get tired of it and demand more originality, but it would be more or less a fulfilling experience, like who would outright refuse more of Blade Runner 2049, right? But the excitement that films like The Force Awakens brought to the fans at the time is basically unimaginable today, because differently from now, back then people did buy into the idea that sequels, remakes, and spin-offs would be handled with care. And that is why all these projects were so successful at the time. But as years pass, not only are the projects becoming more and more trashy, but the audience grows less and less gullible with each passing project. So you would expect them to take a step back and reevaluate their plan of action. Instead, they seem to double down and go down with a ship that is this glamorized version of Archive of Our Own. Which leads us to now. A very confusing and critical moment for the industry, where everything is a trashier version of something, where everything is a clone and a duplicate, where sequels get sequels, and there is another Harry Potter.
It's trash because it's a woman.
So Hollywood these days functions around the question of what if. The worst part of this discussion is that those what ifs are not stated out of interest or curiosity, but out of need to stay relevant with the least amount of effort imaginable. Therefore, a bunch of alternative universes get generated where characters switch races, they switch genders, they become three-dimensional and not in a good way. It will never not be funny just how committed Marvel seems to the tactic of why write new heroes or stories when you can just swap out their genitalia, only to end up with a Hulk that is a she, teenage Iron Girl, Thor the Natalie's version, the Ant Daughter, Black Panther, but the other one. And I am aware that these characters do exist in the comics, but throwing all of them them on screen in a span of a year, after refusing to give their only notable female superhero a solo movie for dozens of years, is just hilarious. Such vital but at the same time meaningless changes are made to create an illusion of freshness and originality to the projects that are otherwise basically copy-pasted rehashes of whatever came before. As I've mentioned so many times before, Rey's character in Star Wars is nothing but Kathleen Kennedy's feminist wet dream, but unfortunately she decided to approach Robert Iger rather than fanfiction.net for that. So Rey Skywalker is just a gender-swapped Luke Skywalker, but at the same time written by people who couldn't care less. And now our beloved Kathy wants to write a fanfic of her own fanfic about this piece of unpolished wood. It cannot get better than this. And all this gets swept under the rug I'd like to call the dilemma of representation. The film industry is not stupid. They know that by representing historically oppressed groups shields them from immense scrutiny from the public, no matter the quality of the product itself. So, instead of admitting that they swapped out characters' key physical identifier to create a false sense of novelty, they just hide behind the argument that it was a necessary step to represent. Race swapping is simply just another cheap trick that has nothing to do with sincere sympathy or tolerance. It is only there to compromise the general public's ability to speak out against the very existence of this yet another lazy alternative universe spawn. The argument that race/gender swapping helps diversity is as true and positive for representation as it is compromising and damaging to the filmmaking and integrity. In reality, it's all a matter of perspective, and it makes sense why politically motivated platforms like Twitter would take a different stance on this subject compared to a creative and artsy platform such as YouTube. If you look at it purely politically, if your end goal is just more representation on screen, the live-action film The Little Mermaid's quality and integrity appears worthless to you. But from the filmmaking and artistic stance, the mere idea of such a project even existing will appear indigestible. Both perspectives are valid and understandable in their own context. It's just a matter of where you personally lie on the spectrum of the question, does the end justify the means? Ariel/Ting/Snow White's race change is not as much of a problem as it is the salt to the wound. It is a reminder of just how little respect these showbiz people have for the legacy of cinema, its lovers, and even the people they're posing to represent, rubbing their hands together and scheming to pit people against each other. Because again, these types of changes mainly serve three purposes: to give us a false sense of freshness and innovation about projects that are simply lazy fanfics of what came before, use it as a marketing tool by purposefully causing controversy, and to render us scared and incapable of voicing our concerns by again purposefully exploiting a very sensitive and delicate subject matter. No matter how much Mindy Kaling persuades us into believing that Velma's race magically changed itself for the purpose of representation, there cannot be any other possible explanation for it other than Mindy Kaling wanting to have her YN moment in the Scooby-Doo universe, probably aware that her personality is obnoxious enough to generate enough disgust for this abomination of a show to get a season 2. The same goes for Jessica here, and this seems to happen a lot recently, where writers take a franchise and instead of adapting their writing to better fit the source material as a professional would, they mold the material around themselves, around their agenda, their ideology, and their very, very lacking understanding of the franchise up until the point where the end result turns into something that is barely recognizable. Like, tell me that Velma does not read as a self-insert fanfic written by a woman going through her midlife crisis instead of, a Scooby-Doo mystery with Scooby-Doo in it. And Hollywood reinforces this because, again, these what-if questions are not posed out of honest curiosity or eagerness to explore Velma as an Indian girl, but out of thirst for relevancy and modernity. And as long as Jessica Gauss of the industry achieves stirring up the conversation and controversy without ever truly participating in it, they're greenlit.
Where are you? We got some work to do now. Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you?
The key difference between the terms fanfiction and adaptation/remake is that the latter is officially authorized, while the other is just some random person's creative expression. But the line between the two has been blurred as of late, since at this point it feels like there's nothing and no one companies like Disney could not get a hold of. The creators' protectiveness over their material has not changed, but what has changed is the film industry's willingness to pay copious amounts of money to disrupt it. The creator's main predicament nowadays is not the question of will they do my life's work justice, but the question of Will I take this money or not? So yeah, this cheapens and waters down the very purpose of official authorization and reduces it to a simply bureaucratic matter. So this causes me to think of 99% of media nowadays as a fanfiction that also happens to be officially authorized. And this matter is not even present for a lot of the recycled media today, since a lot of the time the studios milking the daylights out of them are the ones that originally created them. Authors of the source material more often than not have little to no input on the altered versions of their creations, and this would be okay if most filmmakers of today that are trusted with these projects knew more about film than business. Seasons 5 through 8 of Game of Thrones are just fanfiction of Game of Thrones written by two very pissed off guys that want to burn things down without ever giving it a chance to be set on fire first. And all this because J.R.R. Martin's influence and input over the show significantly diminished during this time. And again, it is not to say that original authors have to be on board in order for the adaptation/remake/sequel to work. It's infamous at this point how much Stephen King hates Stanley Kubrick's version of his book The Shining. The Shining the book and The Shining the movie are seemingly about the same story, but they could not be more different in terms of their vision and character writing. But they're both believed and celebrated to be masterful in their own right. And the only possible reason for this is that the film was made by none other than an exceptional filmmaker that is Stanley Kubrick. With less of a talented or passionate director, almost no project could successfully pull off such a huge deviation from its creator's original storytelling. And I can say with confidence that today I can only think of one or two directors/writers that could even have a potential to do something like this. So without George Lucas or a single competent storyteller in the room of Lucasfilm, Star Wars becomes a collection of incoherent, disconnected fanfics generated by the best businessman in the industry with cameras in hand. And the exact same thing is happening to Marvel. And even if the studios like Netflix initially show interest in giving original authors input, what's the point of having Michael DeMartino and Brian Konietzko on board for the Last Airbender live-action remake if they're still gonna end up off of it the moment a creative difference arises? It seems like it goes against the industry's best interest to give the OG creators too much influence, since sometimes what is the best artistic decision contradicts the best commercial decision. Again, back to The Little Mermaid. Artistically, it would be a much more favorable decision to stay loyal to the source material and keep Ariel's skin color, but commercially, it will prove much more profitable to swap it, to generate drama, controversy, and intrigue, hence coverage, hence money. I could sit here and whine about wokeness or unoriginality of Hollywood all day, but truly, why would they risk being controversial if it didn't guarantee them exposure, coverage, numbers, money? That is exactly what they want us to do. In truth, you could remove all woke or unoriginal aspects of film from future projects and they would still suck, because it would still be made, written, directed, produced by people who suck. And to call their work fanfiction would be a much higher compliment than any of them seem to deserve. These people are not fans of anything. They would not lift a finger without a paycheck, and even then, they will still do their absolute best to do their absolute worst. So no, the film industry is not a fanfiction industry. It's worse. There's no term for this. Unoriginality or wokeness is not the main problem of Hollywood. It's at worst a marketing tactic, and at best just a symptom of something that is as simple as it is heartbreaking. But nevertheless, I still think of this phase of film history as the fanfiction phase, since it is the closest thing to describe my personal understanding and attitude towards the current medium. So, in conclusion, by now there probably has been more than one occasion where you went to watch an adaptation, a reboot, a remake, or just a movie from your favorite franchise and thought to yourself, even I could have come up with a better story. You would be absolutely correct.